Welcome to the Organizational Transformation Kung Fu Podcast with your hosts, Sandi and Jennifer Long.
Welcome to Organizational Transformation Kung Fu, or OT Kung Fu, as we like to call it. I'm Sandi, and I'm here in Toronto, Canada with Satori Consulting. And I'm here talking to you today with my co-host, Jen Long, with Management Possible in Denver.
Hello from Denver, where it's getting warm.
Very warm. Unlike here, where it's like 10 degrees outside right now. Anyway, we have been podcasting now for well over a year and a bit, and we're really excited today to talk about change. When we think about organizational transformation Kung Fu, we think about it in terms of organizations needing to be more disciplined around change and mindful around change. And it takes hard work and practice and discipline in order for change to take root. And so now in the fact that as organizations, we're all in a constant state of change today, given the things that are happening around us globally, we thought that today would be a great time to sit down and really dissect change in organizations and what it means for us as we go forward.
Right. Change is upon us in a lot of ways right now. And while we are talking about the Kung Fu, right? And so the Kung Fu of managing change, how you think about change, and what really changes is typically a process that people think is very time consuming and takes forever. And what have we all learned in the last couple months about change?
It happens so quickly. It can, right? And I was thinking about this, the whole notion of societal change and corporate change. People have always been, not afraid of it, but it's been something that's been a daunting task, right? That change takes so much time. And I wondered, with the things that have changed so quickly, so let's talk about, wearing masks. In a 2-week period in Canada, for sure, people went from nobody wearing masks to 50% of the population wearing masks. So societal norms have changed and corporate norms have changed. Working from home happened overnight.
Right? A lot of companies who were like, we can't do that. That's going to be difficult. We don't want a policy where that's the thing. And then boom, there it is. Right. And I think people are surprised. I think management level folks who had made those decisions are actually surprised at how versatile people were, and that some of those fears around what the risk was, right?
No,
in
low
making
productivity.
That change.
Yeah. There was so many reasons why organizations held back on that, and they're just finding the opposite to be true.
Exactly. Yeah. Getting more done. People are actually showing up on time, prepared for stuff because they're in this new format, and it's working.
Right. So do we have to be as afraid of change the way we have in the past?
Right. And so I've always thought about change from a perspective of, because I always push against the change as this long drawn out process. I think organizationally, there's a lot of things you have to consider, but change in and of itself does happen very quickly, always has, right? You go from being single to married at I do, right? And it's this, you cross this change point right then and there. And then all of the other stuff around change is sort of that thinking about it, talking about it, right? It's all, but the change itself is instantaneous.
Right. And I think organizations have learned a lot about that in this short little time, this experiment that we're all in right now, and how adaptable their staff can be, and how agile organizations can be if forced to be agile.
Right. All this talk about we need to be agile, and all of a sudden, and this is the funny thing about this whole COVID thing, is it's a gift for the people who have been in the change game, because it brought change overnight. And so all of the talk became all of the let's deal with it. And what is the lesson there from a change perspective? In terms of all of a sudden you have to be agile, you don't really have the option to just talk
Right.
about it.
Yeah. So, take a lesson out of Nike, just do it. Right.
Right. This is the value of experimenting.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And what are we learning, and what are we taking from that learning? And so if we're going to continue on, since we're on the agile thing, right? If you're going to continue on the agile skill, what needs to happen now for organizations?
Right. It's interesting because agile is something that comes up. Everybody wants to have an agile organization. Right? When I do strategy work, it's one of those buzzwords that gets thrown all around.
Mm-hmm.
And typically, agile was an IT thing, right? How can we make more agile in IT? But now it's across the organization, and it's interesting how agile they can be when faced with forces that are beyond their control. And
Right.
I wonder if organizations need to keep that mindset going forward when they're trying to make changes.
Right. And so when we think of agile, if you really kind of define what agile is, right, it's the cycle of, experiment, learn, adapt, right? You just kind of keep going through this cycle on a continual level.
Mm-hmm.
And that, I think, is where, if you can master that skill set, which if you're now's as good a time as any to learn it and master it, because I don't think we're going to be in a place of normal, right? We kind of talked about this as we were prepping for this, is that there is no new normal.
No.
Right? There is no, and until vaccines, until there's going to be a cadence of trying this, doing this. We're going to be living in the cycle of experiment, learn, and adapt.
Right. It's interesting. Simon Sinek talked about change. And one of the things he said was, to affect change inside an organization, we must remember why people resist change. People don't fear change. People like comfort. And so when we think about that in terms of the agile, and the experimenting of it, if you shift your mindset to that we are in experiment mode, and people can be comfortable experimenting, right? And living in that space and figuring out what works best and what doesn't work, and throwing out the bad and keeping the good, right? It is a gift. This whole pandemic idea, I truly believe organizations can step back and say, what is the gift for my organization? And how can we be more efficient? How can we be more agile? How can we just make things happen more dynamically than we have possibly in the past? Because people are making decisions. Some of my organizations that are really hierarchical, that needed everybody and their dog to help make a decision, they're flattening that. They're making decisions quickly. They're not going through business case after business case after business case to get everybody's buy-in. And they're able to make those changes and keep people comfortable while making them, but without having to go through all the different levels that they used to have.
Right. And so it's always been, from a coaching perspective, I'm always dealing with the conversations around risk. What's the risk? What's the risk of doing this? What is the risk of not doing this? Right. And that risk thing is you don't have the time now to spend a lot of time dwelling on the risk. And that has been a great catalyst for allowing the flattening of the curve. And this is the decision-making curve, right? Yes. That's gone very as far down as it can go to the people who actually need to own those decisions, which is the stuff they've been looking for a long time, right? But they haven't been able to deal with the risk of allowing those people to make those decisions.
Right. And risk is one of those things that it can stop any decision in its tracks, right? Because there are always risk. But I like that he said, what's the risk of not doing it?
Right.
And maybe if we thought of that first versus what's the risk of doing it, we may have come to different outcomes.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's been an interesting way to kind of look at, and from the organizational perspective, you've got the two aspects that are really kind of dealing the coping with the change, right? You've got the organization coping with the change, and then you have the individuals in the organization coping with the change. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about the two of those and how we look at those maybe a little bit differently in terms of agility goes across both, right? Agility
Mhm.
is for both structures and processes and that kind of thing, and how you're redeveloping your products and services to some degree, because I know those of us in this field certainly are.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting because when you think about change at the organizational level, it's really a group event, a group change, right?
Right.
But at the individual experience, how everybody is experience it on an individual level can be very different because we all react different to change and how it's affecting us, right?
Right. And I think the success of what your organization takes away is very much dependent on where your people are, right? If your
Mm-hmm.
people are anxious and looking to go back to normal, right?
Right.
If your people are uncomfortable, or the working remotely is isolating and stressful, those things are going to impact the ability for your organization to take on some of the changes that it wants to.
Right. And there isn't going to be, you can't go back. There will
Right.
be no, organizations will fundamentally have changed because of this. So if
Right.
somebody's waiting in their home office with their screaming kids and barking dogs to go back to what they had before, I can't see it happening.
No.
Not the same.
No.
It may be slight variation, but still not the same.
Right. It's definitely going to take on a different, especially how things are organized and just the environment, right? So
Mm-hmm.
the organizational change is as much about where things are located, what those processes, how resources are put together, all that kind of stuff is going to significantly be different, because now it can be reevaluated at such fundamental levels.
Right. But don't you think then, from an organizational standpoint, that we need to be listening to our people and how it's affecting them?
Yes.
So it's not a top down, it's almost a bottom up change to that, what it's going to look like in the future.
And I think that change has always been an interesting thing. So traditionally, from a coaching perspective, working with leaders and managers in the organization, change has always had to start with the individual. You can talk about it all day long, and you can put it on a diagram, and you can map out, we're going to start doing this on this date. And at the end, the end game is, the thing that changes is the person's behavior. The thing that changes is how people engage. The thing that really changes is how I make my decisions and how I show up as a person. And that is what embodies the change the organization is looking for. Yeah, you might launch a new software, and that's a significant change. But my impact on that is, how much time am I willing to spend learning it, being in it, exploring it? And do I make those decisions, or do I hold on to old things that I'm comfortable with? And that goes back to that people choose comfort over chaos,
Right.
as they
Yes.
see it. And so that if you're really gonna hold on to the skills around agility and hold on to the changes, and really kind of, it is up to, you really have to have a good pulse on where are your people. And it's everything from their belief systems, what do they think is important, and their mindset around it.
Right. Everybody's going to react differently. The resistance is going to be different levels. Are going to be different from person to person, depending on kind of where age and stage in life, kind of age and stage in career, what they've been through in the past. It all will be different, but we have to listen. And I think, in that whole agility model that you talked about, the piece that I think that needs to be added to it as kind of a new norm would be the postmortem. So what are we learning from this, and how can we apply it to be better? And so I think, the experimenting, the doing, the in improving all the time, but we need to spend time really thinking about how things can be better.
Right. And I think tapping into understanding, it's not only looking at what are our business impacts and our business results, but it's also looking at what kind of resistance are we getting, right? And so there's kind of that 3 levels of resistance of I don't get it, so I need more information. I don't like it, right? This is not my preference. And the I don't like you, which is, I don't trust that this is going to work.
Right.
I don't trust you that you're going to be able to lead this. And so it's understanding where that is, because I think, as we talked about in previous pandemic related podcasts on leading, that this leading through all of this is critical. And that if you're not being empathetic to where your people are, and you're not leaning into that human side of the leadership equation right now, and tapping into and understanding what's working for you right now and what's not, and really listening hard to what's not working.
Mm-hmm.
And because that is got to play into your long-term strategy.
Right. I've listened to lots of different podcasts on leading with empathy, and that's the skill that is most needed today. And when you think about leaders, some leaders have lots of empathy. There's a lot of leaders that are don't have a lot of empathy, right? Because it's all about the end product, the end results, numbers game. And how do we help those leaders turn into empathetic leaders during times of massive change like now, right?
Right. And how do you sound confident as a leader when you're not really sure how it's going to work out because you're taking a risk, right? And so there's this skill around, you've got to, understand the risk, you've got to be empathetic, and at the same time, you have to be confident.
Mm-hmm.
You have to, it's almost like you have to be confident in your empathy, and you have to be confident in your risk to say, this is where we're heading, this is the change we're going to try, and to be okay with using words like experiment. This is an experiment. We're going to look at how this goes. But the resistance factor is probably less than it would be, I'm guessing, from a coaching perspective right now. I mean, thinking about it out loud with all of you. That normally when you do a change effort, you get a lot of resistance because everybody can talk about it, know about it, relax into it, right? Mm-hmm. As opposed to when this just hit. And so you escaped a lot of resistance because there was just no option.
Right. And nobody had time to think, right? Everybody was in do mode, and that's what they did, right? Everybody's working from home. One day you're not, one day you are. And let's figure it out as we go. We need laptops for everybody. How does that happen? That's the thing that people, for those that didn't have a pandemic plan in place,
right?
How did you? So I think it's amazing, and I think it really shows about human resilience to change, and maybe change has been given a bit of a bad rap.
Well, I think we've been lazy.
Yeah.
I think people are finding that they're more flexible than they thought. They're more resilient than they thought. And they're able to do things that they didn't think they could do. And so that's where the gift is, right? We've all learned some things about what we're capable of doing in a short period of time under an immense amount of almost, it's more of a personal pressure. It's a survival, right?
Right.
And that kind of, think about what those forces are. This has got to change. And as I was thinking about all the ways organizations have traditionally gone about change, this whole experience is super exciting because it's forced them through the gauntlet in a way we coach about, and they are never willing to work at that kind of speed. Right. So there's something to be said for speed.
And that it can be done.
Right.
I absolutely. It was interesting when we were talking about leaders and, leading with empathy. And I was reading something, kind of prepping for this call, that said the leaders of tomorrow need playgrounds, not classrooms. And I think that's phenomenal because this is a big playground right now, a playground of learning, of failing and failing fast, moving on, taking that learning. Like, this is a huge playground.
Right. And that failing fast, right? That just that word failure for some organizations is so difficult because they've built cultures around not failing, right? Mm-hmm. And that really the lesson. And I'm curious, as I work with my executives who've come from these kinds of backgrounds, they're exhilarated in a way they didn't expect. Right?
It's interesting. You're right. I hadn't thought of it that way, but there is this optimism, this exhilaration, as you say it, in the tone of people, because I don't know, they're allowed to play.
Right. Right. No one's going to be critical of what they tried and didn't work right now. Right.
Yeah.
It's kicked open the door and given everybody permission in a way that they couldn't didn't feel they had permission before, which is ironic because they could have done this anytime.
Oh, sure.
They could have sent 6,500 workers home.
Yeah. To their home. Yeah. When we start our sessions now, we're always saying, one of my expectations is, embrace the messiness. Right? Before, if you were working from home, you would make sure that the dogs were outside and the kids weren't, and nobody was near you. Now there's people walking behind, there's dogs barking, there's kids wanting food, there's all these things happening. And yet people are still managing to work.
Right. And being actually higher, more productive. Mm-hmm. And so the change there, right, is you really have to focus. You really have to focus in. So you have to block all that kind of stuff out. And it's totally, totally doable. Yeah. And we are less worried about, we've talked about this before too, the change in how you know people, because the space is intimate, because you can see into their lives in a way you've never been able to see into. Mm-hmm. So teams are getting to know each other at a different level, right? That's a shift in my trust and my just familiarity with who I'm working with and that kind of thing. And I think those have all been a boon for huddling together and that connectivity, right? That need to connect as people while we're all sick to death of Zoom.
Yeah. Zoom fatigue.
We have Zoom fatigue because we're sitting in these little boxes, but at the same time, it's so much better than a telephone conference.
Oh, it's amazing. It's an amazing tool, all of those different ones. And I think it's just allowed for this whole messy experiment to thrive. And it's going to go on, right? This whole experiment is not ending. This whole change, this notion of change. It's funny because for years we've been saying the change around us is fast and furious, and it's never going to end. It's just going to get faster and faster. And yet, when you step back and think about it, we were still probably a bit change resistant in our approaches to change.
Right. We were conservative.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
We were allowing ourselves to work on our 7 steps of change and our 8 components of this and our maturity models of that. And we were breathing it in and going slow. And I think this has taught us all how fast we really can move.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So what do you think the end result's going to be?
Because this is ongoing, right? So we talk about Zoom fatigue, and I wonder what the agility fatigue will be, because I think, and we talked a little bit about the use of language, and I think it's important for leaders to think through how they begin to speak about the future and what words they're choosing relative to how they're going to continue to evolve. Because there's no new normal. It's next, right? What's next? And we're not going back. And those are words you want to stay away from, because you're going to put into people's minds the mindset that there's going to be something resembling what was, when that may not be the case. And it's important to prime people and choose language that gives them the sense of, this is a rolling experience and an experiment and a place to learn and grow and try and listen and be empathetic, right? We have to be good with each other, because every attempt at recreating something or establishing something or putting something out or whatever your business results need to be, you may not hit it. Right? Your markets have changed. Your consumers have changed. It's not just your organization that's changed, everything around it, right? It's all encompassing.
And that goes back to that notion of comfort. When you start talking about going back, that talks about going back to a level of comfort that we all had that we don't have now. And so avoiding terms like going back allows people to shift their mindset to say, I need to think about needing to be in this space for a longer period of time.
Mm-hmm.
And it might be, and having to get comfortable with that uncomfortableness of the change that's upon us.
Right. And so I think that keeping an eye on, when I look at shift for people when they move from one role to another, in an organization, normally that this sort of, if you think of a wheel with three spokes on it, and in between each spoke, so 3-piece pie, basically, you've got time, values, and skills. And those three things all have to shift for you to be effective in your next role. And so I think people need to think about that relative to their folks, right? How are people spending their time? Because working from home may mean working weird hours because you're now part-time teacher, part-time pet walker, part-time, whatever it is, right? So how you're managing your time, and that's going to shift. What skills you've got are going to shift a little bit, right? We all had to get tech savvy. We all had to learn how to send a Zoom link. We all have to learn how to, or you're doing Teams or whatever your platforms are, you now have to be platform savvy.
Right.
In addition to what other things technologically your company is leveraging to deal with people who are from remote, right? So that it could be everything from payroll to whatever, right? How you're getting your benefits. And then the last part of that is the value shift of what's important. And that makes a big determination for people on how they spend their time and what skill sets they'll actually take on, right? And the value one is always the one that's lagging in terms of how things actually happen and change. And I talk a lot relative to paradigm shift, right? And we're having a bit of a paradigm shift, and that's all about new truth and versus what you're holding on to be true right now. Is how much new truth have you been exposed to that actually shifts the paradigm for you, that actually changes your value structure fundamentally on what's important now.
Right. Which is a tremendous narrative for leaders right now, right? To really approach it as this three-spoked wheel, as you call it, because as we talked about, resistance levels are going to be different for various different reasons for people. But what a great way to engage in a conversation and to truly listen to what people are going to need, are needing at this present time in what's showing up for them. Right. So talking about what the skills are, can they do the technology, and the time and things like that. And spending coaching time, really understanding individuals and what they're needing, as opposed to really just focusing on end results. So it really, again, a gift about how can we engage at a deeper level with our individual employees that we maybe haven't had to in the past.
Right. Because this is, the empathy is listening and probing around what's their level of insight. Are people taking the time to self-reflect about how this is going for them? Are they really thinking through, do they have good self-insights on how they're sensing, what do they need to do right now, and what would help them? And are you having those conversations on a regular basis, so that as you're trying to develop them in these contexts and get them not only to maintain this level of adapting and learning and be okay with that, because for some people that makes them very anxious. What are, do they have the capabilities? Do they have the opportunity to apply some of these things on a regular basis? And having that kind of, it's a developmental, it's a coaching conversation, really, from a management leadership perspective, and in your one-on-ones. And if you're not having one-on-ones, you really should be.
Right.
Because these conversations are important for people right now. So it's not always in the group format, but the one-on-one format, where you can get them eyeball to eyeball on the screen and say, where are they? Are they resisting? Are they in the I don't get it? And you don't know that, but they haven't said anything. Are they in denial? Right? We haven't really talked about denial, and the what the implications are of when somebody is in this isn't real and this isn't happening, and therefore they can't take ownership of where they are to deal with it.
Right. And depending on which model you think about change model or change curve, denial may be the first place where people go, right? Before even they hit resistance. This is not going to happen. It's not going to take that long. If I just hunker down, I can get through it, and it'll go away.
Right.
Before they realize that, no, we're in it for the long haul. So we're in this for 2 months now.
Right.
This is a long-term play.
Right. And duration is always the killer, right?
Mm-hmm.
The longer it goes, the worse it can get. And this is where, as leaders and managers, you want to know that and Sandi and I are talking about the Kubler-Ross curve, change curve relative to grief, right? And for some people, loss of office space, loss of routine, loss of what was creates a sense of grief and grieving because it's loss as opposed to gain, right? And people who are easier with change will see the opportunity, will take the adversity and turn it into opportunity. But not everybody gets there. And so the stages of grief, the first one is obviously denial, and then it's anger, and then it's bargaining, and then depression, and then acceptance. And the thing about this whole curve is people move back and forth on it.
Yes, and stay in different aspects of it at different time frames. So you could have somebody who moves through it really, really quickly, doesn't even backtrack. You may have someone move through it quickly and then backtrack back into bargaining, right? You may have somebody who stays in denial for a very long time. But if you're not having those conversations as a manager and having those intimate conversations about what stage they're in, what need, and using language that will appeal to people to open up, right? And not feel that it's failure to hate working from home. I have one employee that hates it, can't wait for the moment the office can open back up.
Right.
And so he's not necessarily in denial, but it's just not working for him. So he's going through that curve on a daily basis at different pieces of it.
Right. And you can only handle it better if you can acknowledge that you're there, right? I'm bargaining. I'm in the bargain. Today I'm bargaining. Yesterday I was angry. Now I'm just kind of trying to negotiate.
That's right.
I can handle this. And those are all very real things. And you don't have to be a psychologist, and you don't have to, but you have to understand the curve, and you have to know it when you hear it, and you have to acknowledge it, right? So emotional intelligence skills, it's not just empathy. It's what are you hearing in people when you're talking to them? Can you hear anger? Can you hear depression? Can you hear apathy? Can you hear any of that? And if you hear something, say something. You sound like this. That says I'm paying attention not only to what you're telling me, but I'm also paying attention to your emotional energy, because that's critical in levels of communication, especially coming through this kind of fast, no exceptions, right? There's no group that wasn't impacted. There's no party organization, right? Except for maybe Zoom. Those people probably are like, what?
This is the best thing ever. Yeah, oh, for sure. And technology. So, listen, but also watch, right? So use the technology for the fullest. Look at the body language. Are they looking at the person that you're talking to or not? When you ask them a question or you say, I feel that, how do they react to that?
Right?
You have to be so in tuned as a manager right now, because not only is work different, right? But there's all sorts of other things that are happening behind the scenes. Spouse may have lost their job. There could be parents in long-term care. All those different things are weighing heavy on people. And the only way you're going to really get to know what's going on and help them through the next change and the next change and the next change is to be able to be intimately talking to them about where they are and helping them through.
Right. And so here's from a coaching perspective, which is because we're looking at leaders to coach and to really to embrace as they're seeing this struggle from change. I would stop calling it change, because I think that word in and of itself drives a lot of anxiety for people to begin with. And I would be looking at things like, I love the terminology. Cy Wakeman, who's written a couple of books and done work on a change model, which I want to talk about too, talks about business ready. What are we doing to get business ready? Are you business ready? Not let's talk about change. right?
Right.
Let me prime you for being business ready. So let's have a conversation around what's holding you back relative to where we are now so that you're ready, right? So it's about readiness as opposed to change. And I
Yes.
think that's a great way to look at it. The other part of it is when you coach somebody and you see where they are and you see, are they adapting to where things are, or do they live in that bargaining and that anger and denial place? And part of when you get people there is, as a coach, we do what's called agitate the discontent.
Mm.
Let's talk about what the unhappiness is. Let's really get into what that is and explore it so that you're really feeling it full on, right? What
Right.
what do you hate about this? Why do you want to go back to there? What is it you're hating about that? Let's really talk about what that is, because then that gives you permission to ask the question, well, how long you want to feel like that?
That's right.
Right? How long you want to choose to do that? Because
Mm-hmm.
at the end of the day, a lot of it is a choice point for people on, I can choose to do this different. And that's why change always starts with you. It starts with helping people understand what their choices really are, being
Right.
able to illustrate that for them. So helping leaders have that conversation in a good way.
Yeah. And so if you're not a strong coach,
Mm-hmm.
or you haven't, or this is really different, and these conversations, they may sound almost therapeutic, right?
Mm-hmm.
So getting into the muckiness of things. And as a leader, I may not feel that that's my place to have those muckiness sort of conversations. So
Mm-hmm.
what advice would you have for those leaders? Because we've said they have to have them,
Mm-hmm.
and they have to, kind of shore up those skills. But if they don't really have the skills, they don't feel comfortable, or maybe they feel it's not their place to have those conversations. What advice would you have for leaders to step into this sort of conversation?
These are relationship building skills. These are trust building skills. These are places where you as a leader must be vulnerable enough to step into the gap, because you can't expect that your employees are all handling it well, or that they've got good support networks where they are, or that they're having these conversations at home. And if someone is uncomfortable having that conversation, it'll be obvious, right?
Sure.
They'll say, no, I'm fine, and you can say, you don't sound fine, you don't look fine, and I'm concerned. But if you want to talk about it, I'm here.
Right.
Right? You might not nail it in the moment, but create the space, create the invitation. And a lot of it's just an act of human kindness,
Mm.
right? How can I exercise kind excellence? Be
Nice.
here, be present, and be kind. We're all
Yes.
struggling in different ways, but it's acknowledging that. And the new truth for leaders is if you're not exercising empathy, you're not doing a good job leading through this.
Right. So our takeaway points are: lead with empathy,
Right?
right? Be get into the muckiness of those conversations and open up the space for people to engage.
Right. Change is individual, right?
Mm-hmm.
Pay attention to yourself. Be confident in your risk. Be confident in your decisions, but be kind and be real, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I love what you said about it's not change, it's about being business ready. And so
Right.
let's change the words. Let's change the narrative from we're in constant change and changes all around us
Mm-hmm.
to how do we be business ready?
Right. How are we
in this
business ready for
environment?
the next 6 months? How are we business ready for the new world, the new market, and how we're going to work together, right?
Yes.
That's the new business ready.
Yeah. What a great conversation for our listeners to go back to work tomorrow and say, how do we talk about this, and what then change the conversation completely.
Right. And the last thing I'll say is if you are in a place where you're in denial, anger, or bargaining, or depression, recognize where you are and have a conversation. Find a
Yes.
coach. There's a lot of them out there. Find somebody, a trusted coworker, and really talk about what that is for you. Because if you can't identify where you are, your ability to lead through this is going to be very, very limited. So pay attention if you're leading through this, where your own mindset is, because the shift you got to demonstrate the mindset shifts, the skill shifts, and the value shifts you're looking for your people to take on.
Right. So it starts with the leaders.
Right.
To get through this.
All right. Well, hopefully this has been a helpful conversation, giving you some tips and pointers on dealing with being business ready.
Excellent. Well, Jen, always a pleasure. And I can't wait for our next podcast. Then hopefully we won't talk so much about COVID and the things around us, and we can really get back focusing. But I think as we've really talked about through this podcast, it's given us an opportunity to think differently, to shift our mindsets, and to shift how we're doing things. And so for us, I think it's a huge opportunity to talk about change in a different light.
Absolutely. I'm business ready, damn it. I'm business ready. All right. I'll look forward to talking to you soon, Sandi.
All right. Talk soon. Bye.
All right. Bye.
Thank you for listening, and please visit Sandi's website at satoriconsultinginc.ca. That's SATORI consultinginc.ca, and Jen's website at managementpossible.com. Thanks again.